Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hey kids, and welcome to Grumpy Nostalgia, the Second Look Cinema podcast, the show where we go back to that blockbuster new release wall in our memories, grab a copy off the shelf, pop it in the old VCR, and see what time has done to it. I'm Justin, that's Mike.
Guten Tag.
And we're here to help you navigate all those landmines littered down memory lane. So we're back for more fun, Mike.
Yay.
Yeah, we'll break the fourth wall a little bit. Typically between these shows, me and Mike go and gorge ourselves on some local food every Friday to talk about, show notes. We call it a show meeting, but it's really just us going to a microbrewery and eating pub food until we can't stomach anymore. But we talk about, how the show's trending and what we want upcoming episodes and what we're doing wrong and how we get things better. The downloads have gone down a little, but not nothing that we're really worried about. And we started looking at metrics for the show, and something that we just kind of giggled our way through our pub fries was that the metric that our hosting site uses for downloads says that, typically on our rate, the amount of downloads we're getting per week puts us in the top 50% of current podcasts. So we just kind of fell over ourselves over that, which was funny. But that's not what I really want to tell you about this meeting. I noticed my buddy Mike was kind of stewing in his own juices.
I was troubled.
Yeah. And, I talked to Mike about internalizing things, I said, boy, you're going to carry that weight a long time. But I could tell that something was on his mind. So I think, as I understand it, Mike, I think you have a prepared statement. Is that correct?
This is correct. Yes, I would like to read from said prepared statement.
Okay. Well, this is new to me, everybody. So I'm going to be just
actually, I don't have it on paper, but I do have it on my phone. So
So okay, this is new for me, guys. So I'm in with you. So Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. This kind of relates to our last podcast, just in case listeners want to know. It's from the movie The Rock. First of all, I wanted to apologize to our listeners for an error I made on the last podcast for The Rock. There was an omission I noticed right after we started recording this, since rocked my confidence in continuing with reviewing movies.
I see the pun. You're off to a good start. Keep going.
Thank you. But I think by clearing the air, I can move on and give you a better and more knowledgeable listening experience. We've all seen movie mistakes, flubs, errors, etc. Some of these are being able to see a boom mic in the shot, cameraman reflected in the car windshield, the misedit of a cigarette ash, or an anachronistic Starbucks cup. And the idea of looking back at these movies now as an older, grumpier, cynical, and somewhat wiser viewer makes me see that some gaffes can't be ignored. For instance, pop culture references.
Oh boy. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No problem. While watching The Rock, I wrote down 2 words, Led Zeppelin, on a sticky note, a note which I subsequently misplaced. It was during a conversation between Mason, played by Sean Connery, and his estranged daughter, played by Claire Forlani. She mentions that she was conceived after a Led Zeppelin concert. Of course, being a huge Zeppelin fan, I knew they formed about 1968. And I thought, didn't Alcatraz, where Mason had escaped from, close before that year? 1963, I found out later. Because apparently she was born during his 30-year incarceration at some of America's toughest prisons, which was from, they said in the movie, 1966 to 1996. I pondered this for a few minutes, and I was thrown out of the movie experience for a bit until the next set of Michael Bay explosions brought me back. So an unnecessary flaw is created by someone in the screenwriter's room who thought it would be cooler to mention Zeppelin than say more time-appropriate acts like the Platters, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, or even Sam Cooke. These are the flaws from movies that bother me personally the most. Unnecessary pop culture references that don't match the time or setting and are thrown in by screenwriters who should know better. I'd pride myself in picking up these mistaken insertions, and on this account, I let you down. My deep apologies to our listeners for not mentioning this flaw immediately on our recording of the podcast, and I know this may seem trivial, but it's important to me. And to paraphrase Superman vowing to the president at the end of Superman 2, spoilers, I won't let you down again. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to need a minute to collect myself and dry my tears, Mike.
I understand.
Well, let me be the first to say on behalf of the listening public, we appreciate your apology. And
Thank you. Yes, I like I said, I literally wrote it down on a sticky note, and then it slid underneath something.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God. And I forgot about it. Like I said, I just got distracted by the rest of the movie. And then it just kind of came to me later. I was like, yeah, that. I was like, okay. Sorry to miss that.
Well, Mike, the first part of recovery is admitting that there's a problem. So, I mean, you're well on your way. Well, as they say down here, Mike, bless your heart.
And thank you. And I didn't mean to give away our movie there.
That's okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, so for those that didn't ascertain from that, we're going to look at Superman 2 this week. And we know because it's been about 4 or 5 hours since the last superhero movie came out, Mike. So we're due for another one.
Yes, sir.
I think the next one coming up is the Doctor Strange movie, starring Engelbert Humperdinck. What did I get?
Close. Yeah, Benedict.
No,
Codpiece. No,
that
Bunch. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, that movie's coming out in a couple of weeks, and we started thinking about. Here's where the grumpy part of grumpy nostalgia comes in. When we were kids, we weren't as entitled, I think, as the younger generation. Imagine being, as a 50-year-old guy, knowing that you had a great, big, beautiful CGI loaded special effects superhero movie coming down the pipe every month. We didn't have that. We were really kind of relegated to, our superhero or our comic based things were poorly animated cartoons, I might add. And every once in a while we'd get one in the theater, but they're typically, as you mentioned a couple episodes back, Gull and Globus, or these cheap Dino De Laurentiis versions that were, everybody had, all the villains wore 3-piece suits.
There were, let's say they were today's version of Asylum Pictures.
Yeah. But we remember, and this is going way back in the Wayback Machine, kids. This is 1981. This is the sequel to Superman the movie, which was this huge giant event, I believe, in like 1979. And for us as little kids to go see something larger than life on the big screen, really kind of aimed at us, was just an amazing big deal at the time. I remember, I saw this movie in the Hillcrest Theater in Crest Hill, Illinois. See how they did that, Mike? But it's one of those great little old theaters where it was just a single house, and it had the carpeted lobby and the glass concession booth, and wow, everybody wore their white shirts and bow ties that worked inside. It was just a cool little theater, and I just remember seeing the first Superman there. The second Superman I didn't really see until I think the HBO era. I remember about that time that everybody started to get HBO. That was like the first. Everybody had 3 networks back then, but every once in a while people would get cable, and cable, the mainstay for cable was the TBS, Turner, and HBO. And I think HBO showed Superman 2 ad nauseum. So I remember seeing that as a 10 or 11-year-old kid and just thinking, oh my goodness, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Completely losing the context of what they look like now. But how about you, Mike? When was the first time you saw Superman 2?
I saw it as a wee lad when I was 10 at the Rock Hill Pix Theater, which now is a generic church. But it was a theater known for not bow ties and white shirts. It was known for a sticky floor. And I don't know why I got that reputation, but anyway, it was an experience. I remember as a kid just to see it, because the big budget movies. I think this was around Christmas time, and it was huge, and loved it. You went out of that theater just wanting to fly. It was just like Superman, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I got a little sentimental on this one because this was, my dad used to take us to movies when we were kids, usually matinees. And I just remember that experience. I don't know how much that holds true anymore. I mean, I'm sure dads take their sons to movies, but that was like the big thing. We went, he gathered up everybody. We all went in the station wagon, and it was a day. It was a whole event. And I remember more of those than I forget. But yeah, it's just, I just don't think that really exists like that anymore. This the family movie, I guess. Usually they get dropped off in the Cineplex. My mom goes to see a rom-com, and the theater's essentially the babysitters for 2.5 hours. So, or they just go with their.
That happened in my day too. I remember one time we went up to the Charlottetown Cinema, and my parents wanted to see Heaven Can Wait, and me and my brother got dropped off to see Hooper. So there you go.
Hooper.
Yes.
Wow, your parents were pretty progressive at the time.
I know, right? Burt Reynolds in his prime.
Yeah. So speaking of our back in the prime, so this was released on June 19th, 1981. America was just caught up in the go-go 80s. We were so proud of the 80s. It was directed by, well, this is an interesting story about this movie. It's credited to Richard Lester, but the original director, Richard Donner, who had done the first one, they'd come up with an interesting idea that they knew this was going to be a big movie and they wanted to film two concurrent movies at the same time. So Richard Donner had started both of them, and he got so bogged down into Superman 2 that they weren't able to release the first one on time. And the producers of these guys were real tyrants. The Salkind family, Alexander Salkind in particular, that he had kind of got fed up at the point, and he fired Richard Donner after about 80% of the movie had been shot. And that really was as they say in England, controversy. And a lot of the cast were really put off by that and did not agree to do reshoots because they had to let Richard Lester's film reshoots to be able to get credit for the movie. So like Gene Hackman, even John Williams walked out. So no, I'm done. You don't. So
is that why Marlon Brando's not in this one?
Well, that's one reason. The other reason was he sued the production company for profits on the back end that he didn't get. I think they settled for like $15 million because I think at the time he had made this record-breaking deal for actor's salary just to be in this thing for 5 minutes or so.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But he didn't get enough, so he sued. And I think they settled out of court when they reshot his scenes with Kal-El's or Jor-El's wife. Just cut him out altogether. So
gotcha.
Yeah, there's a lot of internal problems with this movie, but it ultimately got out and it was huge. The screenplay was interesting. Mario Puzo was.
Yeah, I saw the Godfather guy going there.
Yeah, so how can you go wrong, right? So it's Richard Donner's birthday today, just coincidentally, just in case you're had it on your calendar. And so Mario Puzo did the original screenplay from the stories by the original comic book writers, and I think they brought in like a couple hundred James Bond screenwriters that kind of padded out the script as they went along. So as I mentioned, it had a $54 million budget, which at the time made it the most expensive movie ever made for 1981. That's a lot of cash. But yeah, it was quite a hectic shoot. Interesting to point out here, we have to find a way to rag on MTV. I couldn't find one because
this is pre MTV Awards.
It was, right? But I do have a way. This was the first commercial that ever aired on the MTV network. Was this trailer for Superman 2?
My goodness.
And since then, MTV has figured out how to use those commercials with 8 minutes of commercials versus 6 minutes of content on a 20-year loop.
All right, just save it for that MTV podcast.
Let me at them. All right, but so it was a funny shoot. A lot of weird stuff happened, but it did end up, spitting out a pretty cool movie with this ridiculous cast. Mike, I'm sure you did a little homework on the cast. You want to walk us through who was in this one?
Yeah, my homework consists of literally staying up and thinking, wow, what did I see that person in? Or what is, me and you play that game sometimes where we're riding around and we bring up a name or a character and like, wait, who is that played by? And we're like thinking for a little while. You don't want to look it up on Google. You want to eventually grab it from the recesses of your brain.
Yeah.
And you do, but there was a few people in this cast that were like that. And I was like, wait, she was also, one of those things. So
isn't it funny how every year older we get, the least recall we have?
Yeah. It's funny how that works.
Yeah. Yeah. What were we talking about? Sorry.
Oh, cast.
Yeah. See?
Now this is a callback. I noticed Gene Hackman got top billing, which surprised me.
Yeah.
Just like Jack Nicholson getting top billing in the Tim Burton Batman movie.
Right.
I was like, whoa, that's pretty wild. I knew he was more famous than Christopher Reeve, but my favorite Gene Hackman movie was when he was the blind hermit in Young Frankenstein.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And loved it. And then you have Christopher Reeve, obviously, who was, almost born to play Superman. And my favorite Christopher Reeve movie was my favorite time travel movie, Somewhere in Time.
There you go.
Where he sees the penny, it says 1979, and it drags him back into the. Oh yeah,
another HBO early HBO staple. Yeah,
that's right. Margot Kidder, who surprisingly is after a few other names in the credits, probably like 8th or 9th down. I was really surprised. I had trouble. This is one of those ladies I had trouble remembering which I remembered her from other than Superman. I remember her going crazy back a few years ago where she like pulled her own teeth out and went homeless or something.
Yep.
I remember her in Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
That was the one.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's the only other thing I could think of besides Superman. Let's see. We had Jackie Cooper, another one of those actors where I have no idea what he was in other than The Little Rascals.
Right.
And then this movie, it's like there's like a 50-year gap. It's like, oh yeah, there he is, and he's great as Perry White. Terence Stamp, who I think he was famous before this movie. Obviously, he got pretty high billing. I remember him from The Limey, which is one of the most underrated movies.
Absolutely. There you go. Yeah.
Fantastic in that one. And I know he's appeared as like a semi-villain bad guy in other movies recently, but I, for the life of me, can't name him.
Totally looked the part for this, I'll tell you.
That's right. And then you have this little lackey who's obviously another, of course, the English people, the villains.
Yeah.
Sarah Douglas, who I thought she was in Hellraiser, but then I remembered she was in Beastmaster and Quest of the Delta Knights.
Wonderful.
Ned Beatty, who makes a brief appearance. I consider him the original John C. Reilly.
The fat old hog.
That's right.
Okay.
He's best known for Deliverance, unfortunately. You have E.G. Marshall in a wig, who I knew from like radio days and being in Creep Show. He has fantastic appearance in the movie Creep Show. You got to see it.
Yep.
A John Ratzenberger cameo as a NASA scientist who also appeared as a cameo, I think, in Empire Strikes Back.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And nobody believes that when you tell them. No way.
I have two special mentions. One is the sheriff, played by Clifton James. Nice last name.
Yeah.
He has the same exact role. And it's funny you mentioned the James Bond writers, because he has the same exact role in Live and Let Die. I thought it was amazing. He plays a great sheriff. He has some of the best lines in the movie. You've got to learn to kick ass if you want to be a peacemaker. One of my favorite lines. And then a really brief cameo. This is my last one. One of the tower terrorists at the Eiffel Tower. I'm positive. I'm like 98% positive is the stepfather of Harry Potter in the Harry Potter movie.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't place him. I couldn't place him. I thought he was I thought he might have been Veruca Salt's father in Willy Wonka, but I didn't have time to look it up. But
no, that's a different. Yeah, that guy had a little. Yeah,
I had seen that guy's face before, but yeah, thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
So, wow, that's a big cast.
It's a big cast, but it's not like a group of A-listers like you would see in nowadays,
But I think it's interesting after watching this thing and absorbing everything. This ancillary characters or the people that were in the background, the extras, I think really steal the show.
Oh yeah,
and we'll get to that. So, but yeah, so here we are. We're gonna go through another superhero movie, and just in time to maybe understand some of the dichotomy between superhero movies now versus then. So, Mike, if you're ready, let's
press the button.
Push the button, Mike. So the movie opens up with that famous John Williams score, and they're kind of out in outer space. It kind of looks like Pink Floyd at the Lazarium. They're just kind of going through the universe, and then we get our first look at General Zod and his henchman. He's got Ursa, the sexy female, and then Nan, the giant Tor Johnson looking guy who never speaks a word here. And they're all dressed.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. But the scene where they get caught is god awful. I cannot believe how bad that scene was. Yeah, like silent movie quality, and just the editing. What the hell was that?
They just kind of randomly walk into this. I guess it's a trap that this Kryptonian set for them, but they walk in. Nan breaks the stormtrooper's neck, and then they break this red piece of glass, and next thing you know, all the lights go up, and
what the hell?
Busted. And did you notice they're all dressed like they're in the band Shalimar? I can understand what that.
That's a good one. Wow.
But so yeah, they get caught and they get sentenced to the Phantom Zone, which is this prison that Kryptonians invented because nobody had ever broken the law before, so they had to develop this way to capture. So essentially, this giant pane of glass that comes out of the sky and falls on them, and they get trapped in there, and they look like they're stuck in the Queen album cover for all time. So they just kind of get jettisoned into space. So at that point, the soundtrack kind of kicks in, and then we're set up for almost 8 minutes worth of recaps from the first movie. And I thought that was kind of silly, but then I started thinking about, well, wait a minute, this is 1981. And the movie going public probably, they didn't have VCRs, they didn't have YouTube, and they didn't have, anything to kind of reference, hey, what happened 2 years ago when we saw this film? So they make sure you remember. They basically show the entire movie. So all 8 minutes of the Superman, the first one, are kind of shown. And then as they finally credits kind of wrap up, we go back to Metropolis, and this big nerd Clark Kent's walking through the Daily Planet, misogynistically hitting on women as he goes. But anyway, and Perry, the editor, is talking about, hey, there's hostages in France. There's a hostage situation in France. And he gets all upset, and he finds out that Lois Lane, because she's such a crack reporter, she's already there on a Concorde, no less, Mike.
Yes.
So she flew over to. So the newspaper is starting to set up, the story for this.
Quick question: yeah. Why does Perry White have a picture of Bill Cosby in his office? Do you have any? Is that a inside baseball kind of director thing? That did Richard Lester or Donner? Did they either one of them direct Bill Cosby?
Richard Donner used to direct I Spy, and he was a big Bill Cosby fan.
Cool. It's a nice little insert. Back then, to see Bill Cosby now, it's kind of like, whoa.
Yeah. Oops. Uh-oh. One of many things that didn't really carry over well, didn't age well in this movie. So the newspaper is getting ready to do a story on it. So for those of our younger listeners that don't know what a newspaper is, a newspaper is like a web page that you print out and read. People used to do that all the time. But there's an H-bomb in Paris. And of course it's on the Eiffel Tower, Mike, because, of course it is. Yeah. So we cut to these three bumbling hostages, terrorists rather, that are planning this H-bomb. They want cash, or they're going to blow up France. And they're all doing their best, Peter Sellers, Clouseau accents. Sacre bleu, huh, Mike? Yeah,
that's right. Mercy.
Yeah. Okay. But so Clark gets wind of this, and then of course he runs down on the street, and he jumps into a back alley, and they do the filtered edit where he strips off his Clark Kent gear, and he opens up the chest a la Cam Newton, and we see him jump into this Superman. And I thought right there, it's like, when he does that, the little 10-year-old boy in me just said, all right, cool, Yeah. And I thought about, like, we talked the dichotomy of the modern DC films, like those completely joyless Zack Snyder Supermans. There was nothing that just got your juices flowing in those. Like, it's that one little scene where Christopher Reeve's running down the street, and he gets into his costume, and it's like, but
yeah, to me, we'll get to it later, but to me it was like this, the side-by-side comparison would be the Zod versus Superman kind of fight.
Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of combination there. So, we got at the Eiffel Tower, they've got this H-bomb, and Superman flies in. Lois tries to sneak in and crawls underneath the elevator that's right up the top, and everything gives way. Superman, of course, shows up just in time to save her, and then take the entire giant elevator cart and take it up into space. And the H-bomb explodes, and then the shockwaves of that conveniently intersect with the Phantom Zone carrying the three villains, and it shatters. So good odds there, Mike. I guess the universe is not as big as we thought it was.
Yeah, Krypton must just be literally a stone's throw away.
Yeah, so they get loose, but before they make their way to Earth, we do a quick cut back to Lex Luthor, as Ellis calls him, and he's the most well-dressed prisoner I've ever seen with his fancy white silk ascot.
Oh, yeah.
And he's planning his escape. The greatest criminal mind of all time is planning his escape with this doofus. And what I thought was interesting here, Mike, the conversation he has with the very effeminate prisoner, saying, "I want my Liberace album back."
Yeah, that was odd, right?
I think they're suggesting something there.
Well,
not that there's anything wrong with that, Mike.
No, and there's also suggestion later with the astronauts up on the moon too. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
So he's planning an escape, but as I mentioned, the Phantom Zone up in space shatters, and General Zod, played by Terence Stamp, and his two lackeys, Non, which is the big giant beard guy that never says anything, and Ursa, she's real badass. And she's like the most dangerous out of any of those three. So they end up on their way to Earth, and on their way they do a little pit stop on the moon, and they see that this joint Russian U.S. cruise on the moon. Remember when we used to go to the moon, Mike, and it was cool?
Yeah, and spend 45 days, maybe, possibly.
Yeah. So they're up there, and they come in and they, just raise havoc, make a mess, stink up the place, and kill these astronauts. But what I thought was interesting here, Mike, is for all those conspiracy theorists nuts that think that we never landed on the moon, it was all done in a Hollywood studio. I would invite you to watch this scene because if that's the best Hollywood could do on a moon landing, it looks, it's right off the set.
They even had an astronautical consultant in the credits.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and this is where we get introduced to, as you mentioned, Cliff Clavin from in Mission Control. So. So they figure out that they need to go to planet Houston, and they make their way down to Earth. So in the meantime, fresh off their near-death experience, they follow up their terrorist attack story by having the next tough hitting one is they have to go to Niagara Falls to expose this honeymoon racket that there's going on. So Clark and Lois Lane go to Niagara Falls under the guise of newlyweds. And of course, Clark loves this situation because, he's got it good for Lois. And all this time, Lois is the greatest reporter of all time, but she can't put together that, Clark Kent is Superman. So she spends a good chunk of the movie trying to figure out what's going on there. And she starts to understand that there may be something there, but she's not quite sure. Primarily because they're, whenever Superman's there, he's not, but that's besides the point. So we're at Niagara Falls, and we get introduced to this little jerky kid who's playing on the ledge, and Clark, the kid falls, and he falls for like 8 minutes.
Oh, that fall! Oh. There's several visual effects scenes we have to talk about in this movie. That's the first one that came to mind was this fall.
It reminded me of that. You ever see the running gag that Paul Rudd has when he goes on Conan O'Brien?
The Mac and Me.
The Mac and Me,
yes.
where the kid falls in the wheelchair. But it reminded me of that. So, of course, it gives him enough time to go switch into his Superman suit and save the kid. And he returns to the parents. And, another thing that doesn't age well is the corporal punishment. So as soon as the kid gets back from up, the mom starts spanking him, which looks weird now, but we've all been there. And through the glory of watching these movies with closed captions and headphones, we'll get to more of this later. But one of the extras say, oh, Superman, of course he's Jewish, because he's carrying up the kid.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. So Superman looks Jewish.
I didn't catch that. Oh, yeah. Wow.
But anyway. So Clark's suspicious absence during this Superman appearance gets Lois to think that, wait a minute, maybe something's going on there. So she devises this great scheme where she's gonna force the issue and call his bluff. And so she jumps right into Niagara Falls. And then Clark panics because he doesn't want to expose himself. So he doesn't turn into Superman, but he sort of saves her, with Superman's powers as Clark Kent. And then, she feels shame. She hasn't figured it out yet. So much for that. So as they're wrapping up that goofy little subplot there, we cut back to Luthor in the jail cell. And apparently he's got some toys in prison because he was able to produce this like Coachella type 3D hologram of him playing chess with Otis. And he sneaks out into the courtyard, and of course Valerie Perrine, great actress Valerie Perrine, is up in a hot air balloon above the prison. Nobody would see that. She goes in, drops a rope ladder, and he escapes. But of course, poor fat Otis, he heavy, so they just leave Ned behind. Be careful. Much like they did in Deliverance. Now that I'm talking about it, but ding. So they get away, and he's built this little black box that can read alpha waves. So he thinks that he can find Superman's location by going north. So they get in their snowmobile and they head up to the North Pole, and he discovers Superman's Fortress of Solitude. And then Miss Tessmacher disappears, and she's gone forever.
She's gone.
That's it.
Yep.
Never mind. So he's figured out a way to figure out where Superman lives. So there's obviously some tactical advantage there. And then meanwhile, one of the first goofy set piece in the movie really kicks in here. It's when the baddies land. I guess it was Idaho, but I thought it was Texas.
Yeah, they said
Yeah.
East Houston, Idaho.
Right. Yeah.
And I was thinking, why that Houston? Why did they
Why
end up
not just
there?
Houston? I don't know.
I don't.
But anyway,
okay.
they land on this little, town of 200 and raise havoc. So one of my favorite ones here, Mike, is when they start beating up people for no reason. And Jody comes out with his shotgun and says, "All right, put him up."
Oh yeah.
And Zod lifts him up in the air, and then Jody's kid.
That's my dad.
No, he was. I wish he said it that way. He said, "Please let my daddy down."
Oh yeah.
He's straight out of Harry Potter. But, so this is obviously when they shot a scene in Pinewood with a local actor, but because all Idahos have that heavy Cockney accent, right?
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
It did sound a little off now that you mentioned.
But this is where the U.S. military really shows its strength, because they show up to counteract them with one Jeep and 20 guys on foot.
And a 4-star general somehow appears along with them.
And he answers only to the president, right?
That was probably the most effeminate line I've ever heard delivered by a military guy in a movie.
Dude,
I answer only to the president.
Dude, you had one scene, you had one line. But yeah, so we cut back to Niagara Falls, and then through his own clumsiness, Clark, during an argument with Lois, falls into the fire pit, and he's not burned, and his glasses come off, and they finally lock eyes, and then Lois finally puts it together that it's Superman. And it's a mutual admiration society there for sure. So they decide that, what, we're in love. Let's go back to my place. So Superman takes her to for a little weekend, romantic weekend at the Fortress of Solitude, and their love grows, and he decides again.
What's that rule? Is that a made up rule, or is that like a comic book lore thing where he has to be mortal to be in love with him?
I think it was more of a plot convenience thing, but
that makes sense.
But again, in the long history of men making dumb decisions for women, he decides that he's just going to give everything up. A day after the hydrogen bomb was thwarted, he decides he doesn't need to be Superman or save the Earth anymore, and he gets into this chamber that has harnesses the red rays of Krypton, which can convert him to human form, and it's irreversible, Mike. And they mention that they make sure to let you know that about 400 times that this is irreversible. So you would think, so Superman decides to give up, his powers and all his responsibility that this, father and his Earth father gave him in the previous movie about protecting the Earth, and he just gave that up for Lois.
By the way, I would love for a listener to maybe email or let us know, did Superman's parents know he was going to Earth before they sent him off? And I couldn't remember from the first movie if they knew his destination or not, because his mom mentions in this movie that the 3 criminals were coming to, she mentions Earth specifically. Yeah. Like they could be to Earth, and the only way to break the Phantom Zone is to destroy their or whatever by a bomb, a nuclear weapon. And she knew that he was on Earth during these hologram recordings. And I was just kind of like, that's interesting.
I think it was just a Yelp review and an Uber, Mike. That's how it got there. So anyway, so so he converts himself back to human. And what I thought it was interesting about this chamber is that not only did it convert him to human, but also convert his clothes to LL Bean.
That's right.
So he's human. So I guess they drive back from the North Pole to Metropolis and sit down at a diner, and Superman gets his butt kicked by a truck driver, and he's never been seen his own blood before or been beaten up before, so that doesn't sit well. So the diner's all upset about seeing Clark getting beat up, so the waitress tries to calm everybody down by turning on the TV, and when he turns on the TV, you see that there's an urgent message from the president, who is Clark Griswold's father-in-law.
Yeah, father-in-law.
Yeah, Clark Griswold's father's
E.G. Marshall,
with his wonderful toupee, by the way.
Oh, it's fantastic.
That thing was thick, boy, I'll tell you. But that's where we get our kneel before Zod epic line there, that they've taken over the United States, so therefore the world, right?
Bomb the island.
So yeah, that one's for us. So Clark immediately has buyer's remorse. Like, geez, I just turned myself into human, and the next thing you know, they take over the earth. So he says, I got to go back and try. So he walks all the way back. Hey, I get it, you're human, but you know what? Humans can ride a bus and ride a bike or whatever. So he walks all the way back to the North Pole, kind of a reverse Buddy the Elf situation.
It's a good advertisement for LL Bean.
It sure was.
It keeps him warm the whole way up.
Sure was. But he goes up there and he sees the little green crystal that started it all. It calls to him and says, okay, you know what? You're my bad. So he starts over. So it's implied that he's coming back to save the earth. But in the meantime, Lex Luthor finally comes back and he circles around and walks casually into the White House and meets with Zod and says, hey, you know what? I'll make you a deal. I can tell you where Superman is, but I want to rule Australia. So fair enough, right? So as they cut this deal, in comes Superman, in his red, white, and blue, carrying the flag, and asks General Zod to step outside. And that sets up this big battle. And I want to spend a little time here, Mike, because I think it merits it. They had this huge epic fight in downtown Metropolis.
It's the set piece for the movie.
Yeah, and this is where as a 10-year-old, this was great. But as a 50-year-old, okay. But there are a couple things that certainly merit calling out during this fight, this big set piece. So the first one was some really horrible ADR. It's additional dialogue recorded. So this is what they record dialogue after the set when they think there was something they should have been saying there. Somebody that attempts to sound like Terence Stamp says, "Wait here."
Oh yeah.
That's how it starts. It never gets any better. I was taken by the casual onlookers. So they're looking up in the sky and their arms are crossed and their legs are crossed. They're like on park benches watching this all.
The guy on the payphone, woman pushing her baby around.
So they're having this huge epic fight, but it's weird because it's slow motion, Mike, but it's not shot in slow mo. Did you notice that?
I kind of got that vibe.
There's a lot of wire rigging and green screen effects that are just horrible. A lot of product placement in this one too. Like they always get
Marlboro cigarettes, man. I was like stunned when I was like, oh yeah, this is what they used to do back in the day.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I thought, speaking of cigarettes, I thought it was funny that Lois Lane spends most of the movie smoking.
Oh yeah.
Again, I guess kind of going back to the Snyder stuff, the contrast between the milk toast Lois Lane played by Amy Adams, whereas Margot Kidder's just like a tough broad, like she's a butt kicker,
She wants the hamburger all the way.
Yeah, she's cool, she's not a damsel in distress, even though they do their best to make her that way. But yeah, all the villains get either they love kicking each other. By the way, Mike, there's a lot of drop kicks and punts and
I forgot about the drop.
But they always get kicked into a Coca-Cola sign or a Marlboro cigarette sign, whatever,
or the top of the Empire State Building.
Yeah. So what am I? As they pick up this giant bus and they've got people. They figure out that Superman's real weakness is that he cares for the Earthlings, that he just so they pick up a bus full of passengers and they throw it at him. He's horrified because he gets caught off guard and the bus smashes into him, and everybody assumes that took out Superman. And that's where the crowd, all the extras, all the onlookers decide they're going to take matters into their own hands. And again, thanks to
I love the guys carrying the traffic cones like that'll really come in handy.
Yeah, and I literally laughed out loud because again, through the glory of closed captions, one guy says, let's go get him. Yeah, I know some judo. In his glorious Upper East Side accent, which is I laughed forever. So another thing that they use a lot here is the blowing, the super air, super breath.
That was a lot. That scene was a lot longer than I remember. Showing the people blowing around. There was a lot of sight gags going on.
A lot longer than needed to be. So what I guess what was weird here is because again, the contrast of styles. Now all these fights are melodramatic and epic and world ending, but this one was just opportunities for slapstick.
Yeah.
The whole thing was just this big slapstick goof. Like as the wind's blowing around, of course, someone's ice cream gets blown into somebody's face because they're the best time to have some ice cream is
That's right.
2 scoops for world's domination.
Dresses go up.
Yeah.
Toupees fly over.
Toupees fly off. The weird guy in the phone booth that gets knocked over and just keeps having the conversation and laughing.
Yeah.
I cannot understand. Of course, there's this red sequined vest roller disco guy.
Yep, I've got the roller derby guy, and then you have the KFC worker who tries to give somebody the receipt and runs outside.
Yeah, and get blown away. So it's all silly. It's all Three Stooges stuff. But the scene ends with Superman, crawling out of the rubble and then just like hightailing it out of there. So the perception is that Superman's a coward, and so Metropolis is let down and they're deflated, and Zod claims victory, and I guess going after him didn't occur to him, so he just gloats in his victory, and then the real villain steps in, Gene Hackman. He says, "Hey, wait a minute, he's still alive. Go get him. I know where he is." So you think Zod and his axe to grind, why would he just allow Superman to walk away as a coward? He'd want to take him out. Like I said, the real pimp in the movie is Lex Luthor, and he says, "Hey, no, we're going to get him now. I know where he is." So they go up and grab Lois Lane as leverage, and so they all fly up to where they assumed he has fled to, which is his home. Superman ran home. So they get there and they all kind of meet up at the Fortress of Solitude, and then there's like one big last fight where Superman does a lot of stuff that was never really in Superman lore, or a lot of Superman nerds hate this scene because there's a lot of stuff there that didn't really kind of match the Superman lore, like the translocation stuff.
Yeah, the disappearing act stuff. That blew me away. I was like, "Wow,
it's not canon," and people don't like stuff that's not canon. He takes the little S off his logo and throws it over Tor Johnson, and just wraps him up. But he eventually figures out that the same technology that he used to turn the human, he thinks he can switch it around by convincing these guys to go in there and change him. So he for some reason he tells Luthor that, and Luthor exposes him. And then, as he expected he would, and then so he trips the tables on him, and they force Superman in here. And then Superman does the old switcheroo, where he goes into the chamber, and through his super strength reverses the signal and turns everybody on the outside to back to human again. So he goes up and kneels before Zod, and he ruins his party by grabbing his hand and then breaking it, and then Terence really overreacts to a couple broken fingers here. So the gantry crane picks him up, and then Superman holds him up, and he's easily casually dispensed almost.
Oh yeah,
in this little pit.
Just tossed down some holes.
And then the big bearded non-guy, he tries to jump and he can't, so he just kind of gives himself up and falls down the hole. And then Lois, who's being held by Ursa, in a headlock, she doesn't have the power anymore. So Lois turns around and just decks her. And funny thing about this one, Mike, Margot Kidder really clocked her and really knocked her out on the first take. She made contact and knocked her out. So that what you see there in the film is her actually making contact. Yeah,
I'm glad I got that. That's pretty.
But cool. Again, just reinforcing that Lois is hands on, and she's a tough chick. So yeah, they're all casually dispensed, and then the scene ends, and then you never really know what happens to Lex Luthor. But so why wrap up that loose end? So the epilogue is kind of they go back to Metropolis, and Lois is kind of freaking out with the acquired knowledge of what she's seen, and you can tell she can't handle the emotional burden of being in that thing with Superman, given their new relationship. So what does he do? The perfect misogynist way to do that. He gives her the big old amnesia kiss, Mike.
Is that a Superman power? Is that another canon breaker?
That's another one where Superman purists like, no, that's not right.
I mean, I know he can read minds, but to be able to repair somebody's memory, that seems like a little high step there.
Right. She she snaps out of it and starts treating Clark like the bumbling dork he was before, and he smiles. He knows he's won, but he's not done yet, Mike. He goes back to that diner and kicks that trucker's butt.
Love that scene.
Yeah. So he gets a little, he may be human, but he's got some flaws, just like us guys.
He's been working out.
Been working out, yeah. And the little hand gesture he does working out, I love that.
Oh yeah.
But the story ends with the USA moment where Superman's flying into the above the earth, and he banks hard to the left and goes into the sunset, and you hear that rousing score, and you're okay, this all right. No matter what it was Superman. It was cool, right? And then we get at the end, they get coming soon, Superman 3 with exclamation points on it.
Wah.
And for those of you that have seen Superman 3, I don't think those exclamation points are merited at all. But maybe we'll get to that one someday. But it stars Richard Pryor, and he fights this robot woman at the end, which is kind of an allegory about computers and where they were in like 1983. And that one doesn't hold up as well.
Talking about not aging
well at all. And that's kind of the running theme about this. Is it's fun, but I don't think kids now would not really appreciate this for what it was. But at the time, it did launch again horrible sequels. Superman 3 and 4 are probably some of the worst movies ever made in the history of movies. Forget superhero movies, just movies in general. But this one made $108 million, which doesn't sound like much, Mike, but in 1981, if you adjust that for today's inflation, that's $593 million. So that's just in the US. So it made $190 million worldwide. So about over $800 billion worth of box office. As I mentioned, it didn't win any awards, but it kind of set a precedent for big blockbuster movies that they know when they want to have like a sequel to something, like shooting them concurrently, like Lord of the Rings did that 30 years later.
Similar.
And James Cameron's doing that with Avatar at the moment. He's doing like 4 sequels at the same time. But yeah, so it was a big movie, and as I mentioned, I guess we'll do our quick little grumpies here. 10-year-old Justin thought this was a 5 out of 5, of course, because this was the first time you saw it. This was just, again, it was just being there with my dad and, being in the movie and bigger than life hero and a bigger than life screen. And, we had 3 channels back then, and we watched on a console TV that was 22 inches wide. And, movies, things like this, these were our media call outs. These were the big things, so seeing something like that, it can't help but have an impression on you. But watching it again, wow. We talked about reverence and looking things for what they were at the time. And it's a silly movie. It's fun. I own this movie, and I'll keep it in my collection forever. But it's still a good movie, but now that we're older and we know more about adults, and you can see what adults try to get away with, and I think it had anything to do with time. I think there was some shortcuts here, and going for a laugh is always easier than going for the real reveal there. But I'm going to go down to 3 stars on this one, Mike, on my second watch. How do you feel about it?
Goodness. Well, I'm very similar. I had a lot of thoughts about this movie. Like you said, when I saw it as a kid, it was fantastic. It was an experience to see it on the big screen, and it made a huge impression. I'd at least 4.5 stars. I'd probably at the time would maybe say 5 stars, because I even remember seeing it on HBO in reruns. Not a lot. I would see the way you would watch an HBO movie is you would see 15 minutes on a Monday, and then you would see 30 minutes on a Thursday, and then you would see maybe the last hour on a Saturday.
Right.
So I saw parts of it constantly. This was actually probably the first time I saw the whole movie at one time. But looking at it now, oh my gosh, the special effects. There's certain scenes we need to talk about, like obviously the Horseshoe Falls scenes there at Niagara. The transformation scene where he looks like the Red Skull, and
my God. Yeah, that was that looked like my early computer 486 computer games, like Doom, it was Doom graphics. Yeah,
it was incredible. And then the unnecessary shot of Mount Rushmore where the villains change their faces into the it's like, are you kidding? I mean,
yeah,
so visually appalling. It looked almost like a scene you would see from a like a Cal Arts cartoon today. I mean, it was really just awful.
It looked like a Sesame Street segment. Yeah.
Yeah, and these aren't, even the Superman flying scenes, it look really green screen and hokey now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like charming hokey. Like
No.
you look at a Harryhausen stop motion movie from like 50s or 60s, and you think, wow, there's a certain degree of craft and charm to it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Those hold up. This was just,
it was
like I say, just watching some. It did, and even using the Pinewood studio, for the Metropolis scene, I had some bad flashbacks to the Batman and the Interview with a Vampire movie, but that's okay. Yeah. Pinewood is, 3 of the last 4 movies.
They've seen better for sure. Yeah,
but the the good parts of it was, like I kind of said earlier, was the humor that was kind of infused in this. You look at the Zack Snyder films, like you
joyless,
said, and,
completely joyless. Yeah.
It's grim. Yeah, it's dark. You look at this movie, it had some fantastic little bits of humor, like you have the Lois Lane coworker kind of elbowing and said, hey, the big one is strong as Superman,
Yeah.
And the little the billboard that had like the copper tone tanning thing, or like the whole billboard fries except for the lady on it. I mean, just the pinball machine that has the donkey on it that's kicking the trucker guy.
It's funny you said, because there are people today that get a kick out of those kind of movies, those things. They would laugh at this movie now. I wouldn't want to hang out with them, but there are people that would enjoy this, right?
But it's wholesome kind of humor.
That's what it is. It's just silly.
It's the original intent of the comic book. I think, at least the older comic book, the 40s and 50s version of Superman. And then, but like I said, they're the flaws. I had probably the glaring flaw to me was like Zod's motivation to hate the son of Jor-El so much. Like, you never see, obviously, because Marlon Brando went in the movie. Yeah. You just see Zod show up and say, "Oh, our jailer," like, wait.
It's like they had to kind of improvise given the situation the movie was put in. With,
It would have given a lot more oomph to his hatred for Superman if he actually could, kind of capture that Jor-El was, this is what he did. It brings you back to the Zack Snyder kind of fleshing that out a little bit better with, the way they had Russell Crowe kind of, doing it to Michael Shannon.
Yeah, now Michael Shannon you hated his guts. He was a villain. Yeah.
Yeah, he was absolutely Terence Stamp, you look at him in this movie, you have a little bit of and like even the hilarious scene where he's in Idaho and he realizes he's on TV and he's not even looking at the camera. Yeah. I mean, just so it's almost charming to see him like do his little broadcast, and
take your cues, Zod.
you have no it's no like gravitas to the situation of this guy's taking over the world. He's unbeatable. And
well, it's no wonder he got kicked out of the Star Wars Emperor job.
That's right. I forgot about that.
No confidence.
But like I said, watching it now, the music, John Williams' music, that gave it a whole extra star to me. I know it was Ken Thorne,
but
via John Williams,
but the core music was his.
The ending and that alone gave it an extra star. So I'm looking at it now, so it's a middling 2.5 stars for me.
If you don't get goosebumps when you hear that music, you're not really human, really. 2.5. So we're kind of at the same agreement there. That
why the average white band music in 2 different
Thank
scenes?
You for calling that back. I when you think Idaho Cowboy Bar, you're thinking average white band, right?
And then the little love theme version they had in the last scene where Superman beats up the trucker. I was like, wait, I know this song. I'm listening to it, but wait, this is like the slower Atlanta jazz version.
We laughed out loud at that one, and just again breaking the fourth wall. I had to send Mike a text on this. We typically don't talk about these movies before we review them, but I had to send him a text with the Average White Band album cover saying, "Here it comes, be ready." But again, it was a fun watch, and so speaking of watching, before we leave you today, we're going to kind of go through some other things we might be watching. But before we do, I just want to thank everybody who has been continuing to listen to the show, Mike. We talked about, our global audience continues to grow. Here's a new award. We've got our German listeners that we talked about, that number is growing. So, Hallo Deutschland, vergeht es dir. We've got our UK listeners in Jamaica and Mexico now, but this new country we brought in is really making me proud, Mike. Given the geopolitical climate right now, how bad are things in Russia, where we've got in some Russian listeners, Mike?
All right, das vidanya.
Yeah, so
spasiba.
I'm hoping that our Russian listeners are more of the Western progressive thinking people. But if you are a Putin-loving autocrat, please consider at least following the show. Either way, we don't care. And that goes for everybody that's listening. If you give us a follow or a rate our show, we really appreciate that. That algorithm really helps kind of grow the show. And leave some comments. We'd love to hear from you. So you guys keep taking and taking and taking. You got to start giving a little bit. So give us a little back, or you'll have me to answer to. So, but again, we're just really in love with everybody that's listening, and we want to thank you guys for continuing to support the show. So some of the stuff that we're watching, Mike, that I thought was interesting. I've been watching a couple shows this week that kind of wrapped up. I watched two shows. They're basically the same concept, and it's about the rise and fall of the company WeWork, Adam Newman startup in the fantastic show. Even with Jared Leto, he overcomes his presence. He actually did a very good job in this. And the other show was it's called Pumped. It's the story of Uber. Again,
Gordon Levitt.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt did a fantastic job as the founder of Uber. And what's interesting about both these shows, they're basically the same story arc. And it's interesting because, these guys are all the same person, from the social network to, all these allegories are the same. They start off as normal people. And then after about an hour in, you can't wait for them to fail. You're hoping they'll fail. But it was just an interesting take on the tech world and the investment in the VC culture. So I've been watching those two. Those are really great. So Mike, what have you been up to?
I've been watching a series of guilty pleasure kind of shows. There's a writer named Harlan Coben.
Oh, yeah.
He's also an English producer.
All over Netflix. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's the reason I still have my Netflix subscription. Just finished watching Stay Close, which was, a little over the top. It's kind of, it reminded me of Falcon Crest, Melrose Place kind of shenanigans, but it had a good murder mystery involved in it, and I loved it. And I'm now watching one. I wish I could tell you the name of it. It just came out. It's a Polish one that he produced, and just watched the first episode last night. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
If I'll find out the name of it eventually, but it's
I saw that. I
just look for Harlan Coben. You'll find it.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't remember the title either, but they're great. They're great little miniseries. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
It's like I say, it's silly. It's got a lot of unnecessary loud music, but I like it.
But it's like Netflix, it's like, one of the few things that's in English. They're borrowing a lot from Bollywood and Korea. And it's not a lot of content there anymore, but it's all we need to do is have something, and we'll line up. Yeah. So, okay. Well, that's going to wrap it up, guys. Again, we just remind everybody that if you want to kind of follow our show, you can follow us on Grumpy Nostalgia on Instagram. You can see coming attractions. We'd love to hear your comments or whatever like that. And you can also, if you feel compelled to send us an email, you can reach us at nostalgiagrumps@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you on that front as well. So, Mike, that's going to wrap it up on my end. You got anything else you want to add?
Pick up the pieces.
Pick up the pieces. Google it, everybody. You'll be happy you did. It's a funny little tune. All right. So, on Mike's behalf, I want to thank everyone for listening, and we will see you again next week. Thanks.